Here we go. Brian Summer.
Well, good morning, John Reed. John and I are here at the Acumatica Summit 2018 in beautiful downtown Nashville. Yeehaw.
Yes, indeed. And it's a record crowd here.
Yeah, this was a pretty impressive thing to see in its size. John ran into me when I got in Sunday night and told me that the expo hall just kept going and going and going and going.
Pretty much.
And you know what? He didn't underestimate that at all. And we're telling you this because Acumatica is actually a really new software company as far as ERP vendors go, although it is celebrating its 10th anniversary now. But it takes a long time to build a lot of products to have an ERP suite and to build the partner channels and the marketing messages and build a customer base and on and on and on. And we sure saw a lot of evidence that they've actually hit a lot of those marks along the way.
Yes, we did. And we saw a Sage mug that almost got shattered during the keynote today. There wasn't that much vendor trash talk this time around, but there was a Sage mug that barely survived the RFID experiment.
Yeah, that was hilarious. And the demo for the listeners, a live demo on stage, they were pulling all these products out to show their QR or RFID code kind of technology and blockchain stuff. And as they're pulling them out, one of the things that comes out was a Sage coffee mug. And the guy's like, "Oh man, how did that get here?" And then he throws it right off the reader into the back curtains behind the stage.
Because it didn't qualify as a cloud ERP in the sensor.
Yeah, so it couldn't go through the system. It was a nice comedic.
It wouldn't be a vendor show without trash talk. But anyhow, just to frame for the listeners real quick, like, because you and I have done a fair amount of Acumatica podcasts. To me, why I think listeners should care about Acumatica is because they're an upstart player. They're in the middle of what I would say is an important conversation about modern business software and what constitutes modern ERP and modern business software in general. And that's a really interesting conversation. We've had a number of top discussions on those themes the last couple of days, and they're not the only vendor trying to chip away at that issue. It's a really important one. But that, to me, is what I always think about when I'm here is now you have a chance to think about what would a modern approach to ERP look like.
Yeah, and I know I just did a piece for Diginomica, and that's not meant to be a shameless plug. But
it is, but it's good, yeah. Okay, check diginomica.com, folks, yeah.
Okay, thanks, John. But I did this piece, and I bucketed out the HR software market space into three groups. And one of those groups are the traditional vendors who are selling, call them newer cloud-based products, but really the only thing new about them is that they run on a newer platform. And just because the platform might be in memory doesn't necessarily mean that they've actually changed anything fundamentally with the products relative to data models or new analytics, whatever, that are using some of this new capability. So, yeah, what is a modern ERP? You can put lipstick on a pig, but if it was still a system that was designed for 80-column punch cards, putting it on a new platform isn't really that terribly exciting. These guys they don't have all that baggage to begin with. So
right.
I think the discussion here is, okay, so how do they take their solution that's running in AWS and all these other, characteristics, and how's it going to fire up with all the new cool stuff that's available today?
Right. And we could have a whole quite long podcast around the different components of modern ERP. We're not going to go down that road right now, but I think one real takeaway is that it's an important conversation, particularly because as vendors start to figure out the items on that list, they start to push out, we're a cloud product, or we have all these APIs, and it's really important for customers to realize that those statements aren't all created equal, right? And so part
Correct.
of this discussion is how do you ask intelligent questions to help you to discern who the real players are in the modern push and who are just kind of the lipstick on a pig. But that we can address in future articles and other contexts. The thing that we were going to start with here was just on the growth rates. So what are your thoughts there?
Well, they threw out some interesting stats. I mean, here's, again, a company that in just a few years has gone from nothing to over 4,000 customers. There were 1,100 attendees at the show. And as I referenced at the top of the recording, they had an expo area that just wrapped all the way around this conference facility. And I mean, vendors on both sides. It was impressive.
I think one improvement too with this show is that it started as a partner event, and
Correct.
And now you're seeing more and more of a customer presence. And as the two groups intermingle, it becomes a much more interesting show on a lot of levels. So.
Yeah, and I think that actually helps justify why more and more partners show up here, is because there's more and more customers and prospects, I guess, to draw on. There were actually a number of prospects here too. I even subtly asked the CMO here if they would color code the badges so I could find them easier in our travels through the hallways here. But, again, the expo, the attendees, the customer count, in the last year, they've added 37 new independent software vendors. They added 61 new resellers, VARs, those kind of folks.
144% new revenue growth.
Yep. And that's 144%, not
now we got to parse it. Yeah.
Well, no, it's not 44%. That's a year over year growth of 144, which is pretty substantive. Now, this company can withstand that kind of growth without a big capital draw, simply because most of their product is sold by, almost all of it is sold by partners and resellers and distributors. And as a result, they don't have quite the huge customer sales, marketing, and other kind of staff that a lot of ERP vendors have. Their biggest component in their workforce is clearly their R&D group. That's the lion's share of their personnel complement.
So I think when we talk about these growth rates, the obvious question that jumps out is why, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think that's spot on. And I think there's some very valuable lessons that many other vendors, if competitors are listening to this, they ought to pay heed to these points. I heard from 3 different partners yesterday when I asked them why did they join this ecosystem, and 2 of the 3 immediately volunteered this one point, and that was that Acumatica does not view channel partners as a profit center. And they don't charge channel partners to sign up. They don't charge channel partners to take training.
They don't charge for any of the training, which is pretty significant.
Yes.
Yep.
But at the same breath, they expect everyone, including, and this is more newer for them, the partner owner or president, CEO, whatever of the partner firm, they must go through the training immediately and they must pass. And if they don't, they get drubbed out.
Right.
Which they found out that one of the keys to success is you can't just have a firm sign up to be a partner, but if the head honcho of the company is not personally vested in that solution, right, then they're not going to push it.
Let's face it, there's a lot of enterprise vendors with bloated, you might even say flatulent partner counts of partners that actually are not delivering on projects properly, and so that's a huge issue.
Yeah, that's the sad thing. In the vast majority of companies, it's not even a Pareto rule where, the 80-20 kind of deal, where 20% of the partners are dragging 80% of the revenue. And a lot of ecosystems, it's about more like 3% of the partners are dragging about 99% of the revenue in there. And there's way too many partners that are partners on paper but haven't ever really done anything.
I think another piece of that too, in terms of the growth piece, is the verticalization of the product, right? And Acumatica, based on its platform, has made it possible for partners to build out significant extensions.
Yeah.
I talked to the retail POS guys. They're rocking right now. You hear a bunch of stories from the manufacturing that are using the JAMS manufacturing component and new verticals being announced. So, for example, construction is a big one that was announced just recently, and that was where Acumatica said, look, there's no real vertical cloud ERP play in this market. We think there needs to be one, and you build it out, and there it is. And just the surprise they got from all the construction companies they were showing during the keynote of like, wow, like there was nothing like this for me. They're forced to kind of look at proprietary products that don't really have the scope of a cloud ERP product.
Yeah, a colleague of ours, Vinny Merchandani, he's just been railing lately at one ERP vendor after another that none of them actually want to build any of the deep vertical kind of applications that are out there. Whether in utilities, it's billing systems and so forth. And yet it's interesting here at Acumatica. I mean, it's just most of the demos you see are like the one we saw, the tree farming company that,
right,
is hooking up all kinds of water and other sensors next to plants, and the data is going to get fed into an Acumatica system. And they've got systems for, well, the one that gets me still is the medicinal marijuana industry, and they've got them for omni-channel retailing for like the shoe companies and others. And they keep building out more and more verticals, and they do it because for them, it's easy for them to do it.
Right.
Whereas I think a lot of the other vendors, they lack two things. They either lack a product line that actually allows easy development of these things, or they don't have any subject matter experts, or they're unwilling to create subject matter experts and bring them into their firm to build them out.
Got it. Okay. Any other components you wanted to hit on with the sort of why the growth is happening, or should we move to the next?
Let's go to the next.
All right. What's the next? Board member?
Yeah, John and I both had the pleasure independently of meeting one of the newest members of the board here at Acumatica. And over the years, I've met a couple of the others, some of the mostly founders. And this one is a former Microsoft exec who also happened to be the CEO of Citrix. And
not only a Microsoft exec, he had a leading role in Dynamics, which is kind of a big coup for Acumatica to bring a Dynamics person on board. Not so much that they want to become Dynamics, but I think he told me he was managing something like 10,000 partners at one point. So he knows a little bit about scaling an ERP business.
Yeah, and I think Kirill's biggest value to Acumatica long term might be just that point. It's bring the knowledge of how you scale a business to epic levels would be hopefully the best thing he can bring to the organization.
Yeah, and the big question for me as I watch Acumatica will be, can they grow and scale without losing some of the things that have really given them an edge in terms of their customer and partner intimacy? So that'll be interesting. But I talked with the board member around that. Kirill is his name. If I butchered his name, I'm sorry. But at any rate, I tried to get him to talk trash about Microsoft Dynamics, but I was unsuccessful in that goal. But I am going to be writing about the interview, so I will put that up there.
All right. And if there's one thing I know where I ask blunt force trauma kinds of questions, you ask yours in a very more snarky and backhanded way.
I like to dig.
But we're both devastatingly good.
Either way, we get there.
Yeah, we get to the destination. Well, beyond that, I think another area we ought to talk about is what's going to be the approach to the next generation kind of world of ERP, Acumatica.
Right, and that's really important, I think, for customers to be thinking about, as well as just listeners in general. When we talk about what is modern ERP, it's like now the whole stakes of that have changed, because now you're really looking at it not just in terms of, what would constitute an internal sort of cloud transactional product, but how am I going to make smart decisions using external data sources? How am I going to embed machine learning components? Is there a role for blockchain in all this? And pretty much every vendor has to have answers to these questions. The problem is, how do you do that without just lathering on the hype of like, Alexa, what's going on with my blockchain? Is there an intelligent predictive mechanism that can tell me, to mow my lawn in an hour? So there's an issue there. And so Acumatica tried to address that today during their keynote through a series of, I would say, very practical demos in different technology areas.
Yeah, we saw some of what they're thinking is going to be in areas like machine learning and natural language processing and the like. I thought the one that probably was the most immediately pragmatic deal had dealt with their new workflow capabilities. But if I could pull the discussion up, you're right, John. Everybody's got an opinion at every vendor, or a cutesy little demo snippet they want to show. And customers, it's kind of like getting, it's like going ooh and ah when you walk through a house for sale. Oh, it's got granite countertops, but who cares if termites have eaten the whole structure out from underneath it?
Yep.
And you got to look beyond. You got to look beyond the sex appeal of some of these new things and figure out what's really going to happen. The work and one of the cautions I'd put out there, not just for Acumatica, but all the ERP vendors, is I hear people say things like, we want to find how we're going to incorporate these new technologies and the data that they either generate or consume into our ERP system. And I'm not sure that's the right approach. I've never been convinced of that, because most of what happens in ERP has been dealing with transactions. That's what they're about.
Right.
And if you're going to be parsing social sentiment data, you probably need a completely different kind of technology architecture that either is plowing through Hadoop or some other kind of big in-memory databases. And if you're dealing with like sensor-driven data, you need some kind of technology that's going to upfront strip out a lot of basically static null records that are just reporting status as usual to finally get you to the real anomalies. I think different business problems will pop up that are not the core competency of an ERP system and may require different underlying technology and platform components than a core ERP. And I think the real question is, how do people use these technologies in conjunction with an ERP that it gives you an ideal kind of business outcome? And that's where we need to move and elevate the discussion going forward.
Yeah, and I think Acumatica has done some good thinking on the second part, because one of the things they're always looking at with these next gen demos is how do you then bring the right transactional pieces back and automate those, right? So if I'm talking to, the way Acumatica thinks about it, if I'm talking to Alexa about some issue and I order something, Acumatica is going to think about, well, how can we generate an invoice for that and put it back into the system? And so they deal really well with the automating the transactional parts when they think about this, but that's not the whole picture, right? That's part of it.
That's part of it. And kudos that they get that much of it already and are working on it. I'm just kind of pointing out there's a structural issue in the industry and almost a level of hubris from ERP vendors who actually believe that somehow all the data in the world needs to belong in their ERP system. It's like they still think that the ERP is the center of all digital information. And I'm going to call BS on that right now. And even though those are my initials, I'm calling BS on it. Okay.
Well, and that's something I talked about with a customer yesterday, called Xbyte Tech, and they were talking with me about how they do, and I'll be writing up this use case, but for certain scenarios, they work within Acumatica, but in others they need to export data into third-party systems to sort of crunch what they're doing. And part of that is because some of the key data that they need for what you're describing, these next-gen scenarios, lives outside their ERP system, and that's a reality. But I think one thing that I like about how Acumatica is thinking about it is they're always thinking about how can we make this accessible, because what I was hearing from these guys was the good thing is we can always get at the data in multiple number of ways from Acumatica, whether it's APIs or other forms of integration. And so that part they really liked, is that Acumatica never stands in their way and says, this is going to cost you, or this is going to be difficult, or so that part I think Acumatica is on top of. But some of this is just early days. Like, so for example, in the keynote today, we saw that Cherry Lake, an Acumatica customer, they were showing off sensors they're going to be putting into soil that's going to pull back valuable information on soil conditions and stuff like that back into the system. But that's just an initial deployment right now. So next year they'll be much further along.
Well, let's carry that on even further. What a customer like that really wants is they actually want that data to feed into a more robust cost accounting system. They need to know exactly how much did that incremental amount of fertilizer or water and, cost and add to the unit cost of growing each one of these shrubs or trees, what have you. And they want to then be able to compare that to standard versus actual kind of cost structure and everything else. Show me a cost accounting module anybody's got that ever thought about dealing with such digitally tiny levels of detail and that kind of accuracy and those kind of data volumes. It just doesn't exist. And this goes, again, back to we're just at the beginning of how companies have to reimagine how their systems are going to be working in a digital kind of existence.
Yep. And that didn't get solved this week. But then no one solved that.
No one solved that yet. I mean, you know, it's our job to keep poking holes at things that are still 2 and 3 years.
We've been a little pesky about that. That's for sure. Okay, what else we got?
Well, let's just before somebody jumps in and interrupts us, I'm curious. Maybe we can wrap a little with where is the future and the direction, I guess, on Acumatica, and particularly how do you see them from a maturation perspective? Where's the company today versus what we used to see them like years ago?
Well, I think the one thing I've noticed is that it's just a much more sort of confident and focused Acumatica. They're very clear on what's different about them. They don't always do a good job of getting that across. Like, one of their big challenges remains branding and how do you tell a story that's compelling. I mean, I think you and I have both told them in different ways that we think there's a lot of room, particularly in how they're handling licensing, for example, and data, to play that card much more widely in terms of the flexibility of the licensing structure, the consumption-based models. It's pretty close to consumption-based what they use. Like, those kinds of things don't get out the door enough, I think, in ways that would really tell a broader market story. But what I notice is a lot of confidence. And I think part of that is because you go back 2 or 3 years, there were a lot of leadership shuffles in the organization and a lot of executives moving around and coming in and out. And that's really like stabilized a lot. And so I think what you're seeing is a pretty confident group. I think from a customer vantage point, I think there's going to be a need maybe for a customer focused conference, but I think more than just that, it's customers are going to want user group activity in a much more sort of structured way. They're going to need much more sort of peer-based communications with the company directly than they're getting. And that's an evolution of Acumatica that's happening as you get more customers and more volume. They have a natural desire to want to organize and communicate back to you. So there's things Acumatica is going to have to do there, I think, that they haven't done as much of in the past. But, I would classify most of their problems in the problems that you want to have category for the most part.
I would agree. The issues you and I would discuss would be more like great problems most companies would kill to have because things that happen when you have 4,000 customers really aren't relevant when you have 4. Yeah. And they've got clearly some of that. I'll pull it up a level and I go, so I think the company's now right in the middle of its adolescency is where it's at. It's pretty much achieved its, if you will, its adult height and everything else, but it still maybe hasn't left home yet and still lives with the parents a little bit, before it's ready to get out there and strike it out hard and fast on its own. I tortured that analogy, and my apologies to Acumatica on that. But where I'm going with this is I can't really throw any stones at like how they set up the partner ecosystem here. That has served them extraordinarily well. And hopefully they don't make any abrupt changes on that. So I'm confident in their technology team. They, I think that seems to be the kind of bunch that if all you got to do is point them in the direction and they'll go find the right industry tools, whatever, and they'll bring that stuff in there and get it going. I would agree with you that the branding, I think, is really interesting point. The company has a brand awareness issue or name awareness issue a little bit because everyone knows who Sage and Microsoft are out there in the SMB markets because they've been around for a long, long, long time. And they have probably spent cumulatively probably $1 billion or more in promoting their particular brands. Acumatica has, they've got to claw around that, I guess, pretty quickly. And I think the messaging needs to get firmed up on the branding as well. It's what does this brand actually stand for? And I think we got a teaser of that today from the CEO, John Roskell, when he mentioned, he talked about how some companies view their, what was his words? He was talking about their customers.
Had to do with data ownership.
And they own, he said some of our competitors think that they own their customers' data.
Yeah.
And these guys have a very different kind of take on it, that your data is your data and your systems are kind of your systems and whatever. And they're trying to be a much better player actor in the ERP space.
Yeah, and the problem is that a lot of Acumatica's strengths, whether it's we have a great partner model. Well, everyone's going to say they have a great partner model. We have a great platform. Everyone says that now. We have APIs. Everyone says that now. I think where Acumatica can hit a little harder is, for example, I think there's a lot of customer fatigue right now, realizing that cloud in many ways is another form of lock-in. And so Acumatica can hit very hard right now in terms of how would you like a flexible pricing option that's based on your actual consumption that you can easily extend to as many users as you need to without any hassles around individual licensing? How would you like to never worry about any kind of question around indirect access or any issue around how you're consuming data? Those to me are very powerful lines because a lot of companies haven't sorted that with their customer base. Even cloud companies have some of these issues right now.
Oh, yeah. Some of the worst offenses I see on the cloud guys are you sign a deal for an initial 2 or 3 year term, and then the first renewal comes up and they went 3 times or 4 times more for the renewal. And, boy, that'll give you a toxic brand real quick. I got to tell you, I liked your point though, because, the market clearly needs a different kind of behavior out there in a response to customers. And maybe one of the things I want to come back to, I'll tie these 2 points together. When you mentioned about Alexa and machine learning and everything we were talking before, every vendor has those kind of things now,
right?
A cutesy kind of demo deal. And what's going to be different about Acumatica, and this has to come out in their branding, is Acumatica customers have a different experience. It's an experiential aspect to the branding that must come out, not technical stuff. It's not about checking off, okay, artificial intelligence, check, Amazon AWS, check, that's not going to cut it. It's what is the experience. And that's the message they and their partners have to beat home out of the marketplace.
Totally. And just to be clear too, when I'm saying things like, well, every vendor says that they have a great partner program, it doesn't mean that Acumatica can't take true advantage of what they put into that and how happy generally their partners are with those relationships. It's just that you have to then think, well, the market's jaded on this messaging. How can we go around that? And typically what Acumatica needs to do in that front is they need to basically turn partners and customers into advocates for the company, right? And create ways for partners and customers to take that message out, because then it can be received, right? Yeah. So if a customer says to the marketplace, look, I had no problem integrating Acumatica with 5 different software programs because of their APIs and their built-in integrations, that's who can carry that message forward.
Agreed.
Whereas from a brand perspective, I think they can hit really hard on licensing, data usage, and things like that, because no other vendor in the market is willing to talk about that right now. So
they won't even talk to us about it.
Sometimes it's like pulling teeth.
Bring those points up. Yeah.
Yep. You're like, oh, here come these guys again. They're going to ask these friggin' questions around data and access. Anyhow, I think we're officially overstaying our welcome. Do you have any final words?
No, I'm off to Miami now.
Yep.
Anyway, I'll bid adieu here.
By the way, one highlight was having a partner come right up and thanking you specifically for your leadership. So that the meme lives on, Brian. The meme lives on.
Say, I live for that now, man. And it's hilarious when it's partners, not vendors, that want to come up.
Absolutely.
And I thank them for being all in on thanking
all
me.
In, right.
For my leadership.
He was all in. All right, Brian, catch your plane. Thanks, man.
Take care.